Hello and welcome to Feed Your Faith, or welcome back. Maybe you'd like to take your Bible and look at Philippians chapter 1. We're going to be looking at verses 12 to 18 in this segment. Now, we've already heard from Paul. We've heard how he's so grateful to God for what God's doing in Philippi. And now he comes in telling us that his dominating concern is for the gospel, for the good news about Jesus Christ. And Paul was devoted to its advance. And by advance, he meant both its proclamation and its application, what we proclaim and preach, as well as the way we live it out. And so here he starts on the meat of his book, and we can see his strong desire for his readers to be informed. And it's worth noticing that Paul's adverse circumstances did not deter him from communicating the gospel. He reflects on what had happened to him, and he says this: "Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel." That's remarkable. You know, so often our approach to circumstances reveals our character. And the same is true with Paul here. He balances the evidence, does my imprisonment make the gospel advance or recede, and concludes that his imprisonment has helped it advance. Paul was not swayed by personal convenience. He could see a bigger picture here. And he could see a bigger picture for several reasons. You see, his chains attracted attention. The whole palace guard heard about it. It had news value. And the effect of it was an encouragement to Paul as he sat in his chains. Also, I notice his chains encouraged other people. At first sight, this might seem like a disaster. The great missionary apostle chained up in house arrest. But many had become confident in the Lord. They'd seen Paul and they said, well, if Paul can go through this, we can proclaim the gospel too, no matter what happens. And I love just how positive Paul is about his difficult circumstances. I also notice that his example prompted other people to witness. Now, most important to Paul was the preaching of the gospel. And that word that we have, preaching, there was a general term for proclaiming something, particularly something of importance, but not necessarily confined to the church. And Paul says this: "As a result of my imprisonment, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I'm in chains for Christ." Now, it's likely that this palace guard, and we can't be exactly certain which palace it was, were used to handling hardened criminals. And that made Paul's case very unusual, and they took note of it. And the Christians became bolder because they took note of it. Here's what Paul says: "Because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and do all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear." But Paul noticed that other people were coming in on the scene too. They were talking about him in a very public way, but with very different motives. Now, maybe there were some folk who realised that they could score a few, societal points by siding with Paul. Their political rivalry spurred them into talking about his case, and in so doing they communicated Christ. And I can imagine that's the sort of scenario that we've got here, and it certainly happens today. Some political parties find the Christian lobby is to their advantage, and so they will court Christians. But surprisingly, Paul rejoices whenever Christ is proclaimed. Most would write the rivals off, or at least dissociate from them. But Paul has a large heart. "It is true," he says, "that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill." It would be so natural to denounce rivals. But here the apostle demonstrates his great spiritual maturity. In fact, I suspect The preaching of Christ took precedence over Paul's personal feelings. For Paul, Christ was the touchstone. His own circumstances and reactions were secondary. And I, for one, want to emulate his example of big-heartedness, especially in times of trial. God bless you. Well, from here you can like, you can subscribe, and you can click elsewhere to see some more videos from this channel that I hope will feed your faith.